Welcome! Today I want to talk about my game against none other than Candidates winner and World Championship challenger Gukesh. So you might ask, why do I play against Gukesh, and in particular, why do I play him in a classical game? Well, in the beginning of the year we played a team match against the team of Düsseldorf in the second league. And the team of Düsseldorf was amazingly strong, so they demolished the second league and promoted to the first league and will have the goal to play for the title in the first league next year. So that was the reason why I actually played on board one of this team competition against Gukesh. Well, I was kind of hoping that I would play him, and I was preparing a bit for the game, but I was mainly preparing for e4, to be honest, and I thought if he goes for d4, I have some nice opening surprise. Namely, I play a line which I didn't play before for a long time, the Tarrasch with black. So the Tarrasch, when I was a kid, people played c takes d, e takes d, and g3, and this was a typical and long analyzed line. I will actually show you another game in this line later in the channel. But there is also other things. So for instance, here after c takes d, black can play both moves, knight takes d5 and c takes d4, both very fashionable, and I was preparing a bit for one of these lines. So after c5, my opponent went for the move e3, which is also definitely a viable option to avoid all of these things and to keep a more complicated game, which is maybe a little bit less analyzed than the lines I was showing you. Now the game gets to a symmetrical structure. What's the point? Well, nobody really wants to blink first and move the f1 or f8 bishop. The point is, if you move this bishop, then after dc and bishop takes, you have lost the tempo. And for that reason, both sides now make some useful waiting moves. a3, and I played a6. So the idea of a3 and a6 is to, first of all, potentially bring the bishop to a2 or a7, and secondly, what we now see in the game, that after dc, bishop c5, white can go for the move b4. Still typical opening line. Black has several options. I chose what I think is the most popular option these days, bishop to a7, and we follow kind of standard opening theory. Queen c2, queen e7, and this position has been reached already in quite a few games. And here the absolute main line is the move rook to d1, putting pressure on d5, and black usually reacts by playing this move rook to d8, and we get a complicated middle game. Maybe white has a slight edge, but typically it will result in both sides castling to the same side, and it's a long struggle ahead. Instead, Gukesh went for something which I didn't expect at all, and which is also slightly crazy, to be honest, but which makes the game extremely sharp. And sometimes, if you know that you're the clearly better player and better calculator, that's something you can actually afford. So he played the move long castles, and now after d takes c, maybe you can stop the video and you can try to come up with a move that Gukesh played. And as I said, it was of course not the move bishop to c4, which is the move I expected, because then black can develop naturally and get a lot of counterplay on the c file against his king. Instead, Gukesh thinks about using this pawn now as a shelter for his king, and just goes for an attack himself by playing this move g2 to g4. Well, under normal circumstances in a game, this might already be slightly awkward because you know your opponent is prepared, but if you play against a guy of 2750 level, then it's even more unpleasant in a sense. So which options do I have? First things first, I think trying to prevent it is not a good option at all, because then white just breaks on the g file anyways, and this half-open g file is then terrible, especially with this bishop, which also hints at g7 already. So what are the other options I have? Well, I can play the move b5, which actually allows me to keep this extra pawn, and this is what I calculated for a long time. And I can also play the move knight takes g4, which just grabs a pawn. Well, what did I think about when I was calculating b5? So after b5, I thought he's probably going to go g5, and now I was calculating different lines. So I thought if I go back somewhere, he's going to go knight e4, rook g1, and then knight f6 is always in the air, and that's very dangerous. So I was mainly checking this move knight to d5, And white has different options. So one option is to go for something more standard like takes, which leads to a very, very complicated position. Structurally, black is clearly better, but in terms of king safety, he can actually again use this pawn to his advantage to shelter his king and potentially attack in some way like this, for instance, on my king. Yeah, followed by maybe rook g1, and it's very, very unclear. The other option after knight d5 that during the game I was not sure about at all was that he could maybe just sack an exchange. And I saw this move queen to c3 and I thought, okay, this is a complete mess. And actually the computer says it's better for black, but it's very complicated. So for instance, the move f6 could be played. White could go for gf now, intending a rook g1 or maybe even for knight f6. And I will just give you one sample line by the computer just to illustrate what's going on here. Let's say takes. Now there's the threat of f7 and the threat of rook g1. So black goes for this, and now maybe white comes with another attacker, knight to g5. And the computer starts by giving some moves like bishop to d4 and says it's -1. But yeah, of course, it's absolutely impossible to calculate any of this when you're in the position after g4. So in the end, I thought, okay, if I go for b5, that's gonna be extremely risky, and I decided against that. The computer, if you ask it, actually has even a different plan, namely to play this move knight to g4, which looks very, very strange. And the point is very concrete again, namely that after knight e4, which looks like, yeah, white is crushing, black has a very concrete move, the move e5, to answer an eventual h3 with this move bishop to e3 check. And yeah, either you now give up a few pawns for a rook and 2 pieces, and then black gets kind of safe with this plan, or you actually have some line where you get a mass exchange, and then black actually has some attack despite being a piece down for 3 pawns, but now black develops a strong attack with with a5. I think all of these lines are close to impossible to see for a human, so yeah, I have absolutely no regrets about not playing the move b5, but instead going for this move knight to g4. That said, after knight g4, the position is objectively suddenly quite decent for white. Okay, rook g1. Computer gives again some strange move knight e5, which I will not go into, and instead I played the move f7 to f5. So he took on c4, and now of course you see the point of his previous play. So this diagonal is now quite much weaker than it should be. During the game I didn't think this was so problematic, to be honest, because for the moment it's at least closed, and I didn't see how he could actually make use of that. So I felt still kind of okay. I went for the move for b5, bishop b3. Yeah, now maybe in hindsight this could be the best move, but okay, during the game I played the move bishop to b7. And I thought I'm doing fine, I thought. I thought of course he has a lot of counterplay, but I might also get some counterplay on the c file and so on. But now here he uncorked a brilliant move. So maybe you can try to pause the video and you can try to find the move that Gukesh played in the game. Yeah, when I came back to the board, he had this move knight to d5. To see this is one thing, but it's also quite impressive how far he had calculated it. So we discussed briefly after the game. And yeah, what's the idea? Well, the idea is after e takes d, it's now to play rook takes d5. So of course this doesn't work, so just winning back the piece. I guess that's quite clear, because now I pin him and I win the queen. So he relied on this move rook takes d5. And we will see the move king h8 in the game. But here I actually also had another move. So this position, as you can see, it's very, very complex. And I was trying to make this move work, which looks quite strange because I run into a discover check, which seems to win a queen, but that's actually not a good idea for white, because now I pin his queen, and let's say after something like takes, black is suddenly material up. So after rook ac8, the correct move for him is not the move rook to d7, but very similar to what happened in the game later, to play this move rook takes g4. And the point is, if I take fg, he always has this rook h5 followed by check and checkmate. So I can't take. So I was trying to calculate in this line rook g4, what happens if I play again kind of similar fashion as in the game, the move knight to d4. And yeah, it's extremely complicated, as you can see. Check, everything is hanging. Okay, I have to either run or play knight takes b3. So in the game I was calculating with this move knight takes b3. And I thought now after rook g7, white should be winning. And I think it's also objectively the right evaluation. So the point is, I mean, the best I can hope for is potentially some endgame where my pieces are completely uncoordinated and he will keep a pawn on c5, protected by the queen, and have a very active knight and just a desperate position for black. Actually, the move that I didn't show was the move king to h8 immediately instead of taking. And again, there is some crazy lines like takes, and knight d4, and computer says white is winning, and it's actually not too hard to imagine that this is true, because of course the king is extremely exposed. Okay, so I was going through all of these lines, trying to make that work, saw this is probably not going to work, and I was shocked that I now actually thought, okay, I'm probably worse now. And instead went for this move king to h8 with very similar ideas as the ones that we have seen. He went with rook g4. Again, the idea is the same as before. After fg, he has this very nice trick, making use of all of these extremely strong bishops, threatening checkmate, and of course this is not gonna help me in any way. So after rook g4, I thought, okay, my only chance is that I can make a mess out of the whole situation by playing this move knight to d4, interrupting this bishop diagonal. And yeah, here even Gukesh didn't find the best move. As you can see, the position is just incredibly complicated. Gukesh played a move which keeps a solid advantage for white. He played the move bishop takes d4, which is also the move that I think I had expected during the game. But there is a much stronger move according to the computer, which is the move rook takes g7, opening up everything. Yeah, it's such a mess, it's really hard for me to comment on this. It's just very concrete lines. For instance, queen takes g7, knight to d4, threatening this, and even in such a position he could actually play knight c6, and the line continues a few moves to, for instance, such an endgame where white is just winning. So let's say takes, maybe king takes even, and this bishop is weak and white is already a pawn up, will win a second pawn, and white is winning. So after knight d4, this rook g7 was the strongest move, but yeah, it's just desperately complicated, whereas I think the solution he played is much more human, and it's also the one which I had anticipated, namely bishop takes d4. The point is, if I now go for something like fg, I think he can, for instance, play knight g5, and again I have some problems which are very hard to deal with. So I took on d4. And here he played rook g takes d4, which was also what I had foreseen, actually. Yeah, and here we reach the next really critical position. I was now debating for a long time to play either bishop takes d5 or rook ac8, and I thought in both lines I'm actually worse, but I didn't think I was lost in either of the lines. And it turns out what I play is, yeah, just lost. whereas this other move, rook ac8, is probably, yeah, it's definitely better and maybe gives me some chances to survive. So white has some very sharp stuff with rook d7, but let me not go into that. Let me instead try to give you the line which I thought would be played, namely takes, bishop f3. And yeah, and when I had calculated this position, I thought, okay, he's gonna go for something like king b2. My attack here is essentially over, and he's eventually gonna consolidate, and it's not going to be easy for me to, at some point, grab this pawn. So there's always these back rank weaknesses which allow him to consolidate the pawn. Okay, but definitely it's what I should have done in this position. Instead, I went for bishop takes d5, which leads now to a straight out lost position. After rook d5, rook c8, and rook to c5. Yeah, and here I thought, okay, maybe I can somehow get at least a pawn back. Of course, queen c5. I mean, this would actually allow me to get the pawn back and have an endgame, which might still be better for white, but which is far from over. So he of course played this move b takes c. And now when I had calculated this position, I thought, okay, maybe now I will get the pawn back, so either this one or this one, and it could be that my position is actually not so bad. But now when I arrived in the position after rook c8, I realized that after c6, my position is much worse than I anticipated. Mainly, yeah, because I can not really get the c6 pawn, and I can also not avoid that he gets some sort of stable construction. So what do I mean with that? Well, the construction which he wants to get is the construction with a knight on d4. So for instance, if I play something which looks normal, let's say takes, king d2, and maybe a check here, then white goes for knight to d4. And now, yeah, he has a very, very nice construction, which will eventually allow him to convert the position into a full point. So queen f5, for instance, is threatening, and the knight is what Lego would call cemento, so it's very hard to push that guy away from this outpost. So for that reason, I thought let's spice things up by playing this move f4, but also that doesn't work at all, because he could just play e4, which is what he did in the game, and somehow get bishop d5 to work in all of these positions. Okay, I played a5. The idea being bishop d5 now runs into queen a3 and queen f3. But he could just run, which is what he did in the game, king d2, very strong move. Now preparing bishop to d5, and when he gets this cemento bishop on d5, then the position is just over. So let me show you how the game continued. I desperately tried to get some counterplay by creating a passer, but he very calmly now offered this queen trade. So when I said before, usually knight and bishop against rook, you want to trade queens. Here this is no longer the case, because if I trade, this king comfortably controls the pawn, and he's able to push forward his pawns later on. So I had to avoid this trade, but now the position is just lost. Knight g5 was a threat, knight e5 is also a threat, and after a few more moves where I had to come to terms with the game, he opened this diagonal, and eventually I resigned. So what can I say about the game? Well, he went full on out in the opening, directly all in with his long castles and g4. I would guess it's an idea that he had prepared for a player of my level, meaning that even though maybe it's not objectively like 100% correct, it is super difficult for black to find something. And the way I played, which I thought during the game was natural, was knight g4 and f5. This actually backfired rather quickly. And yeah, then in the end, I lost this one opportunity to stay in the game, and instead went for this endgame, which then was just completely lost. But yeah, after the game, I had a quick conversation with him, and I mean, most of his evaluations of some of the positions were like absolutely spot on, where I actually had no clue what was going on. So it's very obvious that he's a player of completely different level in terms of understanding and also in terms of calculation. Still, it was a great experience to play against this young prodigy, and I wish him a lot of luck for the future. That's it. Thanks for watching.